none of this will happen if you don't take care of yourself. Medical school is one thing, but you have to make sure that your mental health and your physical health are good before you can sort of get into this process.
Mission Accepted, Season 3, Episode 1. Hello there.
Hi, Dr. Gray.
How are you doing?
I am doing great. Excited to be here.
I'm excited for you to be here. Number one, because I love Mission Accepted. I love the what do you call that? The success stories of people getting into medical school. And number two, because you are one of our first Application Academy students and have had some success. So I'm excited to talk to you, look at your application, hear from you what you think helped you through this journey, and hopefully help some other people on their journey.
Yeah.
How's that sound?
Absolutely. Sounds great.
Awesome. All right, so let's talk about the application. We'll take a look at it in a second. Okay. For you, what do you think it was that helped you, quote unquote, stand out on your application?
Oh my goodness. I feel it's funny you say that because I feel like once you get to medical school, you realize that you do not. Like everyone does very similar things. But I think that I have really strong interview skills. I really meshed with a lot of my interviewers really well. And I've been working in healthcare for a while. And just understanding how that team works and sort of what's involved. I worked, in the middle of COVID. I worked in some pretty interesting patient populations as well. So understanding not everything is roses and, saving people all the time. Yeah. I think helped me stand out in terms of, okay, she's realistic about the expectations. She knows what she's getting into. Was something that made me stand out amongst others who may just not have that experience or that understanding coming in.
Yeah, and it's amazing, like that whole being realistic, like that's a huge part of the storytelling aspect of what I want students to do is to show the readers, look, I've gone down this journey of self-exploration. I understand what I'm getting myself into, and not necessarily like, I know that patients die, right? We get plenty of that. But just understanding that this is what you want to do. And again, not from I know that this is what I want to do, but really just helping the interviewers, the reviewers, all of those people see that in an application. Yeah. I know for you, you were concerned about specific parts of your application. You switched schools halfway through, which some advisors would say that's like, you shouldn't do that because it looks like you're running away and blah, 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 whatever. You had a good MCAT score, but not a, oh my gosh, MCAT score. Talk about the things that you were concerned about going into this process. And ultimately, were those things that schools were concerned about, at least face to face with you?
So I had so many concerns coming in. I came in, honestly, from high school not being a super strong science student. Yeah. So I went into college not even sure if I would even go into like a medical field or anything like that. I didn't think I was like smart enough. And then during my sophomore year, I got diagnosed with IBS, but I had no idea what was going on. I was at a college that was like an hour and a half away from my school, and I didn't have a car or anything. So I really just wanted to come home and kind of figure that out, which is why I transferred. Looking back, I wish that I had taken like a leave of absence or something like that. But I just wanted to push through. I was like 18, 19, and I was like, I can do it. I just need to be closer to home. Yeah. And so I was definitely concerned about that. And my grades at the time were not good because I was not well. I was not well enough to go to class. At the time, things were not recorded. So if you didn't go to class, you did not know what was going on in class at all. Yeah. And I went to a big school, so they didn't really care if you went or not. And also, my MCAT score was not necessarily what I was expecting based off of my practice scores. But when I got to the interview, literally never brought up. Yeah. None of it. Absolutely none of it. I self-disclosed that I had IBS, and that was kind of a personal choice. I went back and forth on, saying what it is. And I came to the conclusion that, there's a lot of people with chronic illnesses, and just because it's GI, there's a lot of people that have GI symptoms. And if I'm going to be a physician, I should be able to talk about it naturally. Mm-hmm. So I decided to disclose it. And honestly, it was never brought up other than I personally brought it up because it's a big part of my story. And I think my application sort of shows that, and how I've, grown so much from that. So I was kind of more proud of it than anything. But it was never brought up in a concerning light, literally ever. I was so worried that I was going to have to defend myself and be like, this is why I got like a C in this class. And no one ever said anything.
They did all of that work beforehand, and they're like, okay. Yeah. And we'll look at your application and show where that work came from, for why they weren't concerned, which is awesome. How many interviews did you get?
I had 4 interviews. I decided not to go to one of them because I had a few, I had an acceptance already. I applied MD and DO. So I went to 3 interviews. I was automatically accepted to 1. And then I had 2 wait lists that turned into 2 acceptances. So I was 3 for 4, and the 1 out of 4, I just didn't go to the interview.
Yeah.
So.
All right. So looking at your application, let's go ahead and take a look at your application and see where things went right, and if there's any room for improvement. So first thing, there's always. First thing, looking right, the application date, perfect submission date, 5/28. So right at the beginning, looking at your disadvantaged, didn't mark yourself as disadvantaged. SES, this is the automatic qualifier that the WMC puts on. It did mark you as SES disadvantaged. No big red flags, which is great. And then we get to grades. And so we see a couple of high school grades. Good job not destroying your GPA in high school, which is such a common problem. The start was great, and then things kind of take a turn, and we see this big block of yellow blob here. Your sophomore year, where, as you mentioned, right, you weren't going to classes, you were ill, and we see here the switch from one university to the next, going from sophomore to junior year, and then we see the change, right? Both, number one, you have a diagnosis, you're hopefully getting treatment for things, and things are getting better, and you are closer to home, have support of being at home as well. And so everything is looking great moving forward. And we'll see, you did some post-bac work.
Yeah. And
looking at your GPA, when we look here, and I'll zoom in here, your BCPM, so your science GPA, you had basically a 4.0 for 55 credits as quote-unquote senior credits.
Yeah.
Why did you decide to do post-bac work?
I think it was just, so I had to take biochemistry outside because I didn't have time to put it in my curriculum. There were a couple classes that I wanted to take because I was interested in them, and I kind of thought it wouldn't hurt. Mm-hmm. Looking back, I really don't think it made too much of a difference. I think I was really concerned about the number and just sort of like comparing myself at the time. But I really shouldn't have, because I worked really, really hard during my junior and senior year. Like my senior year, I was taking all sciences basically.
Yeah.
And I did well in all of them. So it was one of those things where I probably didn't need to be as concerned, but I was a little nervous about it. So I decided just to take a few classes of things I was interested in that probably wouldn't hurt me.
Okay. So you had the means to do it. You had the time to do it. You weren't in a rush, and you were doing the things that you thought would make you successful, which I think is the key takeaway from this. Is so many students will just look at this 396 at 55 credits and go, okay, I've done enough. I don't need to do anything more. I want to keep moving. I want to just get into med school already. I want to start my life. And you were like, let me do the conservative path and get an extra 35 credits. So I have highlighted here like the 90 credits at basically a 4.0. So you showed the medical schools that you were not this 291 student anymore. And that's the key to this whole thing, is giving medical schools the confidence that you have overcome. And so a 367 science GPA, a lot of people will go, that's a pretty good GPA. But even the story behind your 367, 90 credits at basically a 4.0 coming in is like, okay, great. I have no concerns about your academic ability for medical school. You're in medical school now. You've started. Are you doing well? Have these 90 credits transferred over well?
Yeah, so actually, I'm doing really well. I'm doing better. So we're not ranked, but we know like by like averages how we are, and I'm within the top 25%. And I
Great.
have friends who got 4.0s, went to like crazy Ivy Leagues and got like 528s who are doing way worse than I am.
Yeah.
So it just goes to show that it's very it really depends.
It depends, and I would tell you that's exactly a lot of times what I would expect, and why these upward trends are important, because the medical school knows that you've kind of been through the ringer already. You've personally figured out how to overcome. You've figured out and adjusted to do what works well for you. And these other students who may have just been really bright and bright enough to do well in their undergrad classes, which was me. I mean, I only had like a 3.7 something in undergrad, but I didn't have to work hard for it. And then I got to med school and I got punched in the face, and I had to figure out how to adjust and overcome. So, and you did that already in undergrad, which is awesome. So looking at MCAT, you took it twice, only 3 months apart, literally 3 months apart. What changed in those 3 months that you were like, uh-oh, I didn't get the score I wanted? And then, I mean, some people would always say that it's only a 4-point increase, and it's still less than the average of matriculating MD students. What changed in those 3 months, and were you still way off of potentially what you were expecting?
So I was scoring really high on my practice tests. But I didn't account for the fact that I am a really nervous test taker. And I didn't have a lot of experience with sort of high stakes tests. When I went to my second undergrad, it was a very smaller school. The tests were not very high stakes. Like we had a lot of assignments that also sort of picked up the slack if we didn't do amazing on the test. So to me, I didn't get like that nervousness or that anxiety because I had other things I could rely on. This was a single test one day. So I didn't take into account for that. And I really think that's what happened my first time. Because my second time, I honestly, and I don't recommend this, but I honestly didn't do too much different. I focused a lot on, how I'm viewing the test, and, that it's not the end of the world. I had like a whole sort of mental breakthrough of like, this is not the end of the world if I do not do well. You need to keep telling yourself this or else you're going to psych yourself out again. And I did some practice and I worked on some weak points, but I didn't like completely revamp anything. I was sort of expecting around this range, a little bit higher, possibly. I think that after my first exam, I sort of realized, okay, this is where I am. I'm not the smartest person on this earth. I did not expect the 528. I would have loved the 528, of course. But like, I was trying to be realistic with like, the person that I am, but I knew that I could score well enough to get into medical school. And sort of that was my thing.
Yeah.
But I think I really focused sort of on like the mental turmoil of the test. And that's sort of what I account the score increase for, but I think it was worth it. I think that 507 to me seemed a little bit more favorable to some of the MD schools than the 503 would be. I think that if I applied with the 503, I would have been a little bit more nervous, and the 507 sort of put me at ease. Mm-hmm. But then I ended up getting to medical school, and there's someone in my class that has like a 503 or 504. So then I realized it doesn't actually matter. So
yeah, it does, but it doesn't, right?
Yeah.
It does, but it doesn't. It's all individual, and a 503 for that student worked. A 503 maybe for your application wouldn't have worked, and you just never know. And that's why it's a hard game to play. All right, so you got the 507, you applied, you obviously got in. So let's look at potentially what helped, and looking at your application here. So looking at your first medical clinical experience here, you're an ophthalmology technician and scribe. This is the activity that you kind of started right before you applied, and you were expecting to carry it through the application cycle. You have a nice story here. Obviously, being a part of Application Academy, we work on storytelling a ton. And it's fun looking back at yours because you were the first cohort of Application Academy. And I've kind of tweaked some things. Obviously, I've grown as a person, and I think things are different or better or whatever. Looking at things now, I'm like, oh yeah, we try not to say these things anymore. But you have a nice little story here talking about Dave sitting down and being there. And then the key thing here where students typically go wrong with my storytelling advice is they don't often reflect and go, why was this story important to me? And here you have, I was happy that I was able to assist in the pre and post-op care that allowed Dave to blah, 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 right? So expanding on why this was important to you. So great little story, great reflection. I can see you. I can understand your impact, why this is important to you. So it's great. Posters, presentations, a nice little list of things there. Podcast host of Career Chat. So you started a podcast, you wanted to be like me and have lots of podcasts. A great little story using numbers, right? We talk a lot about numbers for impact. So you have 1,500 listens, 16 episodes, and again, the reflection, who you're impacting, why it's important to you. So great story. This one, interesting, the medical clinical volunteer, you have a great story, but then no reflection on this one. So it's like, okay, you're working with Don, and Don's nervous, and you're taking his vitals, and why was this important to you, right? So just helping explain potentially what your role was. So I have that here. What was your role? And then what was the reflection on that? PACER, this peer advising, counseling, and education. The numbers again here, right? Using over 100 students, showing the impact and the story that goes along with that. Career ambassador, again, great little story. Using numbers for impact, just all of the good things that help show who you are as a person, the impact that you've had on these activities, and not just here is what I did. I made sure that blah, 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 right? Just super basic job description stuff that makes everyone want to yawn. It's no good. More medical clinical stuff. So again, you had mentioned at the very beginning, you have lots of clinical experience. That doesn't necessarily make up for the lower MCAT score, a lower GPA, even though you had those 90 credit hours of the upward trend. But it does show that you've done your homework, that you understand what you're going into, and hopefully in your personal statement, you help the reader understand why you're doing this so that all of these activities kind of come to light and go, okay, now I understand. You got shadowing, which is great. Not a ton. Obviously, a pandemic kind of slowed things down there for a little bit, but you have shadowing, which is awesome. And then obviously you were a scribe as well, which a lot of schools will go, oh yeah, that's basically shadowing on steroids. So
yeah, I the benefit of working in like a privately owned office was I followed around the physician all day long. I was basically attached to her hip. She had laryngitis often, so I would talk for her, which interviewers found really funny because I was basically talking like a clinician, while I was just working as a scribe because I had to talk for her. So I learned how to think like her. It was definitely a real benefit to have that experience in like a smaller setting too.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, those smaller private practices are awesome experience. Mm-hmm. So good shadowing. More leadership here, again, using numbers for impact, which is awesome. Great research story. I love the little Cheerios story here. I love that one. So good stories all around. The one thing here for most meaningfuls, looking at this mental health technician, again, lots of story without the reflection. And what I've been trying to do a lot lately with the Application Academy students is the why, the most meaningful, the reflection being why was this most meaningful to you?
Yeah.
So being able to hit that a little bit. More research, tutoring, great story around. I love that you have a hobby in here, baking, and just setting that scene of the newspaper from 1943, the recipes there, which is awesome. Yeah. And then you have your personal statement here. So starting off, you're talking about this journey that you went on with your own diagnosis, your own healthcare, your own chronic illness. And I remember going back and forth in an Application Academy with you of like, do we talk about it? Do we not talk about it? Do we kind of skirt around it and kind of hint at things? Or do we just hit it face on? And obviously, at the end of the day, it's your story. You need to be comfortable with what you're doing. And that's ultimately what you did. Mm-hmm. Did this come up at all in your interviews? Did people want to talk about this? What happened?
No, it literally did not come up. It came up when I talked about it. people were way more interested in what I was doing currently and what I was involved with. But yeah, I think that in terms of when I was deciding, I was really thinking about the schools I wanted to apply to. I really wanted a school that was going to kind of take me as I am. I was not willing to sort of negotiate on that. Some students are like, I will literally go anywhere as long as like they will take me and I will get a degree, which is great. But medical school is really hard and you need to feel supported or else it's not a good time. And I can confidently say that the school I'm at now is incredibly supportive. And I feel like they chose me because they knew that I was giving them all of me and going like, you got to take this as it is. I'm not going to like be a different person or anything.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I made the choice, was the decision. Okay, do I want to sort of hide this and try to convince them that like I'm not chronically ill or anything? Or do I say like, hey, I'm chronically ill, but this could be a great benefit to patients.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the route that I went.
Awesome. So you have your kind of seeds starting out, and then this kind of second-ish paragraph. It's kind of hard to tell if this is a whole second paragraph or just kind of a continuation. But you have the kind of a red flag here, the red flag statement, as I like to call it, of like, hey, during this time, I struggled with my grades. Just so you know, when you go look at my transcript, here's what happened. But then again, looking at your transcript and seeing that 90 credit hours as at close to a 4.0, there's no issues, right? No concern about your academic ability. And then you get into your watering events, as we call them, right? Of like, okay, what did you do to explore healthcare for you? And you have working as a mental health technician, this story here of Tim, great reflection, going into a different location, working with a different patient. Again, another nice reflection. How did this impact you? How did this kind of contribute to your journey of wanting to be a physician? And then a really strong conclusion, really helping the reader understand what it is that you want to do with this degree that we're potentially going to give you. How are you going to go impact the healthcare world, impact your patients, and go be a good carrier of our name? So great conclusion. So overall, awesome personal statement. I wouldn't expect anything less being an academy grad. Looking at your school list, what kind of drove your school list? What were you looking at?
So I was looking at schools that students were happy at. There were plenty of schools that students are very miserable at, and I was trying to sort of vet those out.
How did you find those?
Oh, so on like forums, SVN and Reddit, I didn't really go on those sites other than to see what other people were saying about the schools. Because sometimes you'll like occasionally get like a student who will come in and be like, hey, I am miserable. And you have to take that with a grain of salt, right? Because it could be someone that's like really upset that they didn't get in or anything. Or it could be something else. So you have to kind of take it with a grain of salt. But Reddit and forums, and also just word of mouth. So I have a lot of friends who are medical students at different schools, and they know other people who are medical students at other schools. So sort of talking to my network of friends and seeing what they have to say about certain places. I also looked at obviously like GPA and MCAT score, but I really kind of gave that as like a basis. Because ironically, at the medical school I'm at currently, I am like 7 or 8 points below their average MCAT score, and like a few points below their average GPA too. So it doesn't really mean a lot, but it was sort of giving me this idea of, well, I'm not going to apply to like John Hopkins, right? Like it's just not going to happen.
Why?
I had limited funds.
Well, that's a different reason. But when you say it's not going to happen, why? That's the mentality that I'm trying to crush.
I don't know. I think I had heard a lot of things about the school, and not like specifically Hopkins, but just a lot of the more competitive schools and sort of like the environment that's there and sort of the students that they're accepting. And it's not that I couldn't get into John Hopkins. Because of my grades. I think it's more, I'm not the kind of person that would go there.
Okay.
And I think it's a combination of like, and it's just like a personality. Like I'm not a 4.0 student. Like I'm not super competitive, and not everyone that goes to a high whatever school is, but there's cultures to all these schools, and I just don't think that I fit the cultures. And because my grades are also lower, I think it reflects a little bit on my personality as well. So
looking at the school list, you barely have any public schools on here. You have a couple public schools from Jersey and New York, with the rest basically being private schools, which is strong, right? As a resident of one state and understanding that public schools in other states probably don't want you, don't need you, or if they are potentially using out-of-state students to pad their stats and go, okay, we're only taking the out-of-state students if they got a 520. That happens. So great school list. And again, that's something that we talked a lot about during Application Academy, of really making sure students understood what it was that they were looking at and how they built their school list and all of that fun stuff.
I had a few DO schools as well.
Yeah. So you had a couple DO schools as well. So obviously, ultimately, a successful application cycle for you. Looking back, I would love to understand, you were part of the first Application Academy. How much of that do you think helped your application, your journey, all of that fun stuff? Oh, one thing I didn't ask was this your first application cycle?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. One and done.
One and done. That's what we like to hear.
That's why I waited so long to apply. I really wanted to make sure that I had, the best application to put forward. I had laid it all out on the table, and I still, had the expectation anything can happen, but I knew that what I was putting out was the best I could do at that time.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And Application Academy, what made you sign up for it, and did it meet expectations, all that fun stuff?
So it did. I thought it was a really great concept of learning a little bit about, how to tell stories and why they're so important. I really think that it helps solidify my philosophy of, everyone has a story, and, figuring out stories from patients and things like that. I think that it was great to be able to work with other students. I loved that. I thought that was the best part. And I know I'm still in contact with a bunch of them too. So it's nice to hear from them as well. But just being able to sort of bounce ideas off of everyone in a very non-competitive environment is the most important thing, and something that I value a lot. This process is hard enough. I don't need people vetting me or trying to be better than me or, whatever. So I think that Application Academy was the great sort of environment to sort of get me through the application process, because I was just so stressed and so confused. I went to a small school, so I didn't really have we had a single advisor. There was no team of people. I had no idea what I was doing other than listening to your videos and crossing my fingers that I'm doing the right thing. So I think it was a great way to sort of bounce ideas off in terms of just writing the application, but also just suggestions for what we should be doing in terms of, interviewing. I learned a lot of good interviewing tips as well.
Yeah.
But I think just the importance of telling a story, right? I think it's really easy to think of people as numbers, or diagnoses, but they're people. They're just people. And I tell this to people all the time when they're interviewing at my school or other schools, and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so nervous. I'm going to talk to this fancy doctor that's on the admissions committee. I'm like, he's just a person. He probably walks the dog in the morning.
He's
he may
picking
go
up
for a
poop
run.
just like everyone else.
Yeah. So it's just, and that's one of the things that I don't think people get is these are just people with stories. And if you tell your story, it's going to connect to someone in some way. It's going to hit someone's ear, and they're going to go, oh my gosh, I also have a family member with IBS, or I also have a chronic illness and I'm a physician, but I don't talk about it because we don't talk about it. So, you never know what ears you're hitting. And it's so important to tell your story, because it's the only way that we become more personal and more humanized.
What are your hopes for the future? Have you narrowed anything down or excluded anything at this point?
I excluded a few things just based off of what I've been in. I don't think that I will be going into psych. I worked in psych, and I love everyone that works in psych, and it's a wonderful field, but it's just not for me. I'm looking at surgical specialties. Because I think that the most important way to sort of change the culture is being the people to change the culture. So that's something that's really important to me, is just, being a part of that change, particularly in fields that are maybe not as culture friendly. So I'm excited to be a part of that. I also really love medical education, so I've gotten involved with admissions a lot. So that's also something I want to be a part of in the future.
Nice. What words of wisdom do you have for the student watching this on their journey?
Oh my gosh. Probably that, everyone's human. We're all individuals. Not everyone's perfect. They may say that they are, or they may say that they worked for the NIH and they've like cured cancer. But we're all just people. We do things. We have wonderful stories, and we've taken a lot away from it. But at the end of the day, you need to take care of yourself. I think it's so, so important. None of this will happen if you don't take care of yourself. Medical school is one thing, but you have to make sure that your mental health and your physical health are good before you can sort of get into this process. And I think it's so important. And students get really wrapped up in, make or break of this being the only thing. And I completely get it. I was the same way. But then I got here and I realized, oh my gosh, this is way harder than applying. And you need to be able to, know how to take care of yourself and know how to be there for yourself, because it's such a long road. And it'll be there a year or two from now. It will. It's not going anywhere. The application cycle is not going to shut down and then there's going to be no more doctors. Like, that's not happening. So you can always try again. And I think that nothing is worth more than just taking care of yourself.